She thought she was denying entry to someone who did not belong. But in less than 5 minutes, that same woman would quietly take back control of everything in the room. The chandelier light shimmered across marble floors as Maya Johnson stepped inside the restaurant. Her simple dress drawing immediate attention, not because it stood out, but because it did not try to, and in a place where every detail screamed status, that alone made her visible. Heads turned, whispers followed, subtle at first, then sharper, more deliberate, because people were not just noticing her, they were categorizing her, placing her somewhere beneath the standard they believed defined the room. And at the center of it all, Victoria Whitmore watched with quiet amusement, her posture elegant, her presence commanding, the kind of woman who never needed to raise her voice to control a space. And when Maya approached the host's stand, that was when the shift began. The hostess hesitated, just long enough to look toward Victoria for confirmation, a silent question asked without words. And Victoria answered with the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but powerful enough to decide what happened next. "I am sorry, we are fully booked tonight," the hostess said, her tone polite but firm, though several empty tables sat clearly in view, and a few guests glanced over, curiosity building, waiting to see how this would unfold, because moments like this were not uncommon, and they rarely ended differently. Maya paused, just for a second, her eyes moving across the room, not confused, not offended, just aware, as if she were noticing details no one else considered important, and for a brief moment, something felt slightly off, not enough to explain, just enough to create a question, because instead of leaving, instead of arguing, she simply stood there, calm, steady, unbothered in a way that did not match the situation. And that was when Victoria spoke, her voice smooth, precise, carrying effortlessly across nearby tables. "Some places maintain standards," she said, lifting her glass slightly, her tone casual, but intentional, and not everyone understands that. A few quiet laughs followed, controlled, approving, reinforcing the invisible line that had just been drawn. And this was the moment where most people would step back, apologize, disappear, but Maya did not move, not even slightly, her posture unchanged, her gaze lifting slowly until it met Victoria's directly. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, almost curious. "Standards," she repeated softly, as if considering the word rather than reacting to it. And then, after a brief pause that stretched just long enough to make the room lean in, she added, "That depends on who gets to define them." Victoria's smile did not disappear immediately, but it faltered, just slightly, like a crack forming beneath polished glass, because Maya's words did not sound like defiance. They sounded like certainty, and certainty had a way of unsettling people who were used to being obeyed, the kind of quiet confidence that did not need permission to exist. And for a moment, no one moved, not the hostess, not the nearby guests, not even the waiter who had been standing half a step forward, ready to escort Maya out. The air itself seemed to pause, waiting to see who would reclaim control of the moment, and Victoria, who had spent years commanding rooms like this, was not about to let it slip away. She let out a soft laugh, controlled, dismissive, the kind meant to shrink someone without raising her voice. "You should be careful with your tone," she said, finally turning her full attention toward Maya, her eyes sharp, evaluating, almost amused again. "Confidence is admirable, but misplaced. Confidence can be embarrassing." A few heads nodded subtly, the social gravity of the room pulling back toward Victoria's side, because status had weight here, and she carried it effortlessly, or so it seemed. The hostess straightened again, regaining her script. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave," she said more firmly now, gesturing toward the door, the words rehearsed, practiced, safe, but Maya still did not move, not even a shift in her stance, only a slow breath, her gaze drifting past them, past the polished bar, past the private dining rooms, as if she were remembering something rather than confronting anything. And that was when the smallest detail began to unravel everything. Because one of the servers, a young man standing near the corridor, suddenly froze, his eyes locked on Maya, recognition hitting him before he could hide it, his posture stiffening, his tray lowering slightly, as if his hands no longer trusted themselves to hold steady. And he whispered something, too quiet for most to hear, but loud enough for the manager emerging from the back hallway to catch. The manager's steps slowed at first, then quickened, his expression shifting from routine focus to something sharper, something alert, and as he approached, his eyes moved from the hostess to Victoria and finally landed on Maya. And in that instant, everything changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably, like a switch being flipped behind the scenes, the kind of change only those paying close attention could feel before they could understand it. Because power had just entered the room, and it did not arrive with noise, it arrived with recognition. The manager stopped just short of the host's stand, his attention fixed on Maya in a way that did not match the situation everyone else believed they were witnessing. And for a brief second, uncertainty flickered across his face, not recognition, not yet, just the sense that something did not align. Because while the room still saw a guest refusing to leave, he saw composure that did not belong to someone out of place. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his tone neutral, controlled, scanning the scene carefully. The hostess answered quickly, almost too quickly. "No issue. We are fully booked," she repeated. But her voice carried less confidence now, as if the statement no longer felt entirely solid. Victoria stepped in smoothly, reclaiming the narrative with practiced ease. "It is already handled," she said, her expression composed, though her eyes lingered on Maya with sharper interest now, because something about her still did not fit the expected pattern, and that small inconsistency began to grow, the kind that makes people watch more closely, question quietly. Maya reached into her bag then, not hurried, not defensive, just deliberate. And for a moment, even that action created doubt, because nothing about it felt like a reaction. It felt like a continuation. She pulled out a simple card, plain, unremarkable at first glance, and handed it to the manager without explanation. And he took it, expecting routine, expecting nothing. But as his eyes moved across the surface, his expression shifted, slowly at first, then unmistakably, not shock, but recognition forming in real time, the kind that rearranges understanding piece by piece. He looked up at her again, searching her face as if confirming what the card suggested, and that hesitation, that need to verify, was enough to send a ripple through the room, because now the doubt had spread. Guests leaned in slightly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Victoria's confidence tightened into focus, her gaze narrowing as she tried to read the moment before it was spoken aloud. And then the manager straightened, his posture changing in a way no one could ignore. "M.S. Johnson," he said carefully, the name landing with weight. And in that instant, the uncertainty disappeared, replaced by something far more definitive, something that shifted the entire room without a single raised voice. Victoria felt it before she understood it, the subtle shift in the room that no amount of wealth or confidence could immediately control, because the way the manager stood now, the way his shoulders squared and his attention remained anchored on Maya, it was not how one addressed a guest, it was how one responded to authority, and that realization began to creep in slowly, like a shadow moving across something she thought was firmly in her grasp. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," the manager continued, his voice now steady, professional, but undeniably respectful. And still, he did not look at Victoria, not even when she let out a small, disbelieving laugh, the kind meant to pull attention back toward her. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her tone sharpened, stepping forward slightly, unwilling to be excluded from a conversation happening in front of her. "I am certain there is no misunderstanding. I have been a patron here for years," she added, her voice rising just enough to remind the room of her presence. But the words did not land the way they once would have, because now people were no longer watching her. They were watching Maya, waiting, trying to piece together what they had missed, what they had assumed too quickly, and Maya, still composed, still unshaken, simply met the manager's gaze and gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing triumphant, just acknowledgement, as if this moment had always been inevitable, and that quiet control only deepened the tension, the kind that made even the smallest sounds feel louder, a glass being set down, a chair shifting, someone clearing their throat, all of it echoing in a room that had suddenly forgotten how to breathe normally. The manager turned slightly then, finally addressing the staff. "Please prepare a table immediately," he said, his tone no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. It was decisive, clear, and it carried weight. The hostess froze, her earlier confidence dissolving into confusion. "But we are fully booked," she started, her voice uncertain now. And that was when the manager looked at her, just briefly, but enough to make the message unmistakable. "We are not," he replied, calm but firm, and the words settled heavily into the space, because everyone knew what they meant. The rules had changed, not the actual rules, but the ones people followed without thinking. The invisible hierarchy that had just been rewritten in real time. And Victoria, standing at the center of it all, felt something unfamiliar pressing against her composure. Not fear, not yet, but the uncomfortable awareness that she might have misjudged something, someone, in a way that could not be easily undone. And for the first time that evening, her silence was not a choice, it was a reaction. The table was prepared faster than anyone thought possible, a quiet urgency moving through the staff like an unspoken command. Chairs adjusted, silverware aligned, glasses polished twice though they already shined, and all of it happening under the weight of a silence that no one dared to break. Because now every movement carried meaning. Every glance held questions no one wanted to ask out loud, and Maya stood there still, not rushing, not acknowledging the sudden shift with any visible reaction, as if this level of attention was not unusual to her, as if she had seen this exact transformation happen before, and that calm only deepened the discomfort in the room, especially for Victoria, who remained standing where she had asserted control just moments ago, her posture still straight, her expression still composed, but something beneath it had changed, something subtle yet undeniable, because the confidence she wore so effortlessly now had to compete with doubt, and doubt was unfamiliar territory. "This is unnecessary," Victoria said finally, her voice measured, attempting to regain authority without sounding defensive. "There is no need to rearrange the entire floor plan for one guest." And her words were carefully chosen, deliberate, but they no longer carried the same influence. Because the manager did not respond immediately, he simply turned back to Maya, offering a slight gesture toward the prepared table. "Your table is ready," he said, his tone respectful, almost deferential, and that single moment confirmed what the room had begun to suspect, that this was not about accommodating a difficult customer. This was about recognizing someone who did not need to ask for anything. And the realization spread quietly, like a ripple across still water. Guests exchanging glances, staff adjusting their posture, the atmosphere reshaping itself around a truth that had just surfaced. And Victoria felt it fully now. The shift she could not control, the attention she could not reclaim, and for the first time, she studied Maya not as an inconvenience, but as a question, something she needed to understand, something she had underestimated. And Maya, instead of immediately taking the seat offered to her, turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the room once more, slower this time, more deliberate, as if she were taking inventory of something, beyond appearances. And then she looked back at the manager, her voice calm, steady, carrying effortlessly through the quiet space. "Before I sit," she said, "I would like to know something." And the room seemed to lean forward again, drawn in not by spectacle, but by the quiet authority in her tone. "Is this how your guests are usually welcomed?" And the question did not sound like an accusation. It sounded like an evaluation, and that difference made it land far heavier than any raised voice ever could, because in that moment, everyone understood that the situation was no longer about service, it was about accountability. The question lingered in the air, heavier than any accusation, because it did not demand an answer. It demanded honesty, and honesty was far more difficult to perform in a room built on appearances. The manager's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the pressure settling onto his shoulders, his gaze lowering for just a brief second before returning to Maya with a new level of seriousness. "No," he admitted quietly, the single word carrying farther than he expected, "because in a silent room, truth does not need volume. It needs courage." And that admission sent a ripple through the space, subtle but undeniable, a few guests shifting in their seats, others glancing down at their plates as if suddenly aware of their own role in what had just happened. And Maya held his gaze, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity, the kind that does not seek to punish but to reveal. Then something is broken, she said calmly, her voice steady, measured, and impossible to dismiss. And the words landed with precision, not directed at any one person, but at the system they all participated in, the assumptions made without thought, the judgments passed without question, and for a moment, no one spoke, not because they could not, but because they did not know how to respond without exposing themselves further. And that silence, that deep, collective pause, became the loudest moment of the night. Victoria felt it pressing in around her, the shift that had begun as subtle now fully realized, because the attention she once controlled had turned into scrutiny, and for the first time, she was not observing the situation, she was part of it, her earlier confidence now forced, her posture still upright, but no longer effortless. This is being blown out of proportion, she said finally, her tone attempting to reclaim logic, distance, control. It was a simple misunderstanding, nothing more. But even as she spoke, the words lacked conviction, because the room had already seen too much, felt too much, and Maya turned her gaze toward her then, not sharply, not confrontationally, just directly, as if acknowledging her presence for the first time in a way that carried weight. A misunderstanding implies both sides were unclear, Maya said, her voice even, her expression unchanged. But this was very clear, and that sentence, simple and precise, settled into the space like a final piece of truth no one could rearrange. The manager straightened again, his role now unmistakable, no longer managing a situation, but correcting one. "We will address this immediately," he said, his tone firm, decisive, and the staff around him responded without hesitation. Because authority had been redefined, not by volume, but by presence, and as the room slowly adjusted to this new reality, one thing became certain. The evening was no longer about service, it had become about something far more lasting, something no one in that room would forget. The manager's words did not echo, but their impact settled across the room with quiet authority, because now action followed truth, and action always reveals where power truly lives. He turned to the hostess first, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Step aside for a moment," he said, not as a suggestion, but as a correction, and she obeyed instantly. Her earlier certainty replaced by a stiffness that came from realizing she had followed the wrong lead, the wrong signal, and now the consequences were unfolding in front of everyone. The staff nearby adjusted as well, subtle shifts in posture, in attention, in awareness, as if the entire system was recalibrating itself in real time. And Maya watched it all without interruption, her expression steady, her presence unchanged, because she was not here to create a scene, she was here to see clearly, and what she saw mattered more than anything anyone could say. Victoria stood still, her fingers tightening slightly around the stem of her glass, though she quickly relaxed them, maintaining the image she had built so carefully over the years. But the room was no longer reflecting her the same way. The admiration had faded into observation, the quiet support into distance, and she could feel it, even if she did not fully accept it yet. "I think we have spent enough time on this," she said, her voice measured, attempting to close the moment, to move past it, to restore the balance she once controlled. "Surely we can all return to our evening." But the words fell flat, because the evening had already changed, and everyone knew it. The manager turned back to Maya, his tone respectful, but now carrying a sense of responsibility. "We will be reviewing what happened here tonight," he said, personally. And that single word held weight, because it meant this was not just a minor correction. It was something that would be addressed at its core, not hidden, not dismissed. And Maya gave a small nod, acknowledging the statement, but not rushing to accept it as resolution, because resolution required more than words. It required understanding. And she took a step forward then, finally moving toward the table prepared for her. But each step felt deliberate, each movement observed, as if the entire room was learning something simply by watching her walk, not with arrogance, not with victory, but with quiet ownership, the kind that does not need to announce itself. And as she reached the table, she paused, her hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, her gaze lifting once more to take in the room, the people, the staff, the systems in place. And in that moment, It became clear that this was not just about one night or one interaction. It was about something deeper, something that would not be undone with a single apology, and the room, whether ready or not, was beginning to understand that too. She did not sit immediately, and that hesitation, that quiet pause with her hand resting lightly on the chair, held more authority than any command spoken that night, because it told everyone in the room that this moment was not finished, not yet, and the manager remained standing beside her, attentive, waiting, while the staff held their positions with careful stillness, as if even the smallest misstep could deepen what had already been revealed. Maya's eyes moved slowly across the dining room again, not searching, but measuring, taking in every detail, every expression, every shift in energy that had unfolded since she first walked through those doors. And then she turned slightly, her attention returning to Victoria, who had not moved from her place. Though everything around her had changed, the elegance still there, the posture still composed, but now it carried something heavier, something less certain, because the control she once held had slipped into observation, and being observed was never comfortable for someone used to leading the gaze. "You have been coming here for years," Maya said calmly, her voice steady, not loud, but impossible to ignore, and Victoria straightened just slightly, instinctively reclaiming what she could. "Yes," she replied, her tone measured, cautious now. "I value places that maintain a certain standard." And the word lingered. Standard, the same word that had framed the beginning of the night. But now it sounded different, not confident, not absolute, but exposed. And Maya nodded once, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "Standards matter," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But they are not measured by who you exclude. They are measured by how you treat the people who walk through your door." And the simplicity of the sentence carried more weight than any argument could, because it did not attack, it clarified, and the room absorbed it fully, a quiet understanding settling in that went beyond the moment itself. The manager lowered his gaze slightly, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition, as if something essential had just been named, something that could not be ignored moving forward. Victoria did not respond immediately, and that silence, her silence, was different from before. It was no longer controlled. It was reflective, the kind that comes when certainty begins to unravel. And for the first time, she looked at Maya not as someone beneath her, but as someone she had failed to understand, and Maya, seeing that shift, finally allowed her hand to move, pulling the chair back just enough, not hurried, not dramatic, simply precise, as if concluding something far more important than a conversation. And as she prepared to sit, the room held its breath once more, not out of tension this time, but out of awareness, because what had just happened would not stay within those walls. It would carry, it would change things, whether anyone was ready for that or not. And then, without another word, Maya sat down, the soft sound of the chair touching the polished floor echoing far louder than it should have, because in that moment, it was not just a seat being taken, it was a position being reclaimed, not loudly, not forcefully, but undeniably, and the room exhaled in a way it had not realized it had been holding back, the tension shifting into something quieter, something reflective, the kind of silence that lingers after truth has been spoken and cannot be taken back. The manager stepped slightly aside, still present, still attentive, but no longer needing to direct anything, because the direction had already been set. The staff moved with renewed precision, not out of fear, but out of awareness, as if they understood that what they were doing now mattered in a way it had not just minutes before. And Victoria remained where she stood, her glass untouched, her posture still composed, but no longer untouched by what had unfolded, her gaze fixed on Maya for a moment longer before it lowered, just slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, the kind that comes when perspective shifts in a way that cannot be reversed, and no apology was demanded, none was offered, because the moment itself had already done what words often fail to do. It revealed, it clarified, it left no room for misunderstanding, and Maya, now seated, did not look around for approval, did not acknowledge the eyes still quietly watching her. She simply adjusted the napkin, at her place setting with calm precision, as if she had always intended to be there, as if nothing about this night had surprised her, and perhaps it had not, Because some people do not seek to prove who they are, they simply allow others to reveal what they believe, and in doing so, they show the difference between appearance and truth. And as the low hum of conversation slowly returned, softer now, more thoughtful, something in the room had changed permanently, something subtle but lasting, because every person who had witnessed this would carry it with them. In the way they looked at others, in the assumptions they questioned, in the silence they chose to break or keep, and that night, in a place built on status and perception, something far more valuable had been restored, not by force,